kill me so bad he can taste it.
How can I always gonna kill anybody?
Attica! Attica!
What are you-
Attica! 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 Remember Attica!
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Randy Credico, live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in New York City, WBAI.org. If you're streaming, at the very top, that was Al Pacino from the great film Dog Day Afternoon, one of my favorites. And we played that because today we're going to focus on the 50-year anniversary of Attica, which will be on September 9th. And there's a big event on 2 days, on the 9th and the 13th. And we'll be talking to Marty Stoller, who's one of the organizers of the event. A lot of people involved. And it's called Attica is All of Us. So we'll get to that in just a few minutes. First of all, I want to say, I want to bring up a couple of events that are taking place. I interviewed Roger Waters and Steve Donziger on the Progressive Radio Network the other day, and you can get that at my YouTube site, Randy Credico Live on the Fly. A great interview. Tens of thousands of people have already seen it. It's one of my best, and it's about the Donziger case against Chevron. And so we talk about what has to be done to help him not go to jail on October 1st. And one of those things is for you to be out there October 1st in his support. He needs a lot of people out there. 8 a.m. in the morning at Federal Courthouse in downtown Manhattan, 500 Pearl Street at 8 a.m. Let me repeat, 8 a.m. I'll be there. That's October 1st. Steve Donziger needs your help, needs your support. And if you want to be there, and if you can't be there and you want to support his defense, you go to DonzigerDefense.com. DONZIGER defense.com. All right. That being said, there's another thing going on this week on Saturday, the 28th at Washington Square Park. And this is a big event, a rally for Julian Assange. And it's being sponsored by NYC Free Assange. And I will be there along with Bianca. That's 2 p.m. at Washington Square Park. I think it's near the fountain, 2 to 4 p.m. So Bernadette and Chuck will be there. So we hope to see you there this Saturday between 2 and 4. We'll have a good time. All right. A lot of people are going to show up. So that pretty much does it. And by the way, the Assange Countdown to Freedom show was here. It's no longer here. It's at Progressive Radio Network, Gary Knowles Network. And so every Monday at 10 a.m. It's the most important case in the country right now, maybe the world. So you need to just go to the website, either prn.fm or go to Assange Countdown to Freedom. You'll be able to get all of those shows. All right, we're going to get to Attica right now. We're going to take, this is a National Lawyers Guild promo for the 9th and the 13th of September events called Attica is All of Us. We'll be right back with Marty Stoller.
We become the living archives of what happened 50 years ago. We know the history. I mean, as devastating as it was on the 13th, that much more so post 13th of September 1971.
Time is 9:45 a.m.
I knew I was in a fight for the brothers' lives. But the actions of the state, shooting fish in the barrel, was so wrong and so horrible. We all saw it. We also saw wounds.
We was there, and we know each other from being there, and that means a lot, because that was a hell of an experience. It was horrific, and it was good that, you know, we still here after all the stuff. We've been shot in the head and everything, I got bullets in my chest, and we still here. So thank God that we could just tell a story and be honest about it.
That was a promo from Attica is All of Us, which takes place on September 9th through the 13th. I'm Randy Credico, live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in New York City. The subject, of course, is Attica today. And our guest, as I previously mentioned, is the great civil rights attorney, human rights attorney, my attorney, kept me out of prison on 4 different occasions. We'll talk about that at a future date. Marty Stuller, welcome back, Marty.
How do you do, Randy? Nice to be here.
Yeah, so you saw that. It's great to have you here. That promo there. Tell us about that promo and who's in there and the significance of what's coming up.
Well, what's in the promo is primarily one of the Attica brothers, one of the survivors of the massacre that happened on September 13th, 1971. He was one of the people in D Yard, and he talked about his experience. And there's a much larger set of archives of those of the Attica brothers who remain alive, talking about their experiences, and they will be part of the presentation on the 50th commemoration of the Attica Rebellion and the Attica Massacre, which takes place on September 9th this year, and also on September 13th.
Well, there's a lot of little promos there, and it's at the atticaisallofus.org. And you go to that and you can see some of these wonderful promo videos. And you can also register to be part of it, because I know much of it is going to be virtual. So that's Attica.
No, Randy, we've made a decision that all of it's going to be virtual.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That has to do for the safety of the participants, as well as the safety of everybody who observes it. So the whole thing is going to be, unfortunately, virtual. That's where we are now in this country, and I think that's the safest place to be.
Isn't that what I said? I said the whole thing's going to be virtual.
Yep. No, well, you didn't, but it's okay.
All right.
What's going to happen is, though, on September the 9th, there are going to be a couple of panels that talk about Attica then. And some of the panels will include some of the Attica brothers who were actually there, who lived through it, who will recount their experiences. They will include some of the observers who had been invited to be observers on behalf of the inmates in their negotiations with the state from Attica 9th to the 13th. There'll be family members and others who remember what happened 50 years ago and kind of want to put a present hallmark on the events of 50 years ago. The most significant event, of course, takes place on September 13th, when the state of New York declines to continue any negotiations with the inmates who have been gathered in D Yard and have created a sort of a separate society that is capable of negotiating with the state of New York. The state's response with then Governor Nelson Rockefeller, a vicious bastard if there ever was one, decided that the way that they would deal with the Attica Rebellion was to crush it. And so state troopers came in, guards who had been on the prison went home, got their deer hunting rifles, and came in and sat up on the turrets. And what occurred on September 13th, as the state retook the prison, was a massacre.
A turkey shoot, basically, wasn't it?
A turkey shoot is a phrase that went around among the National Guardsmen, the state troopers, and the guards who had come back and joined in the turkey shoot. In the course of the takeover, there were 39 people slaughtered. All right. Among them were 9 hostages, 9 guards who had been held safely by the inmates during the course of the days of negotiations with a special protective unit, and they'd all been carefully kept safe from any kinds of reprisals. Right after the state retook the prison, they issued a press release that said the inmates had slit the throats of the guards and cut off their genitals, thereby making sure that the world saw the inmates as a bunch of vicious killers rather than a bunch of rebellious young men who were standing up for human rights and their right to exist as human beings. A couple of days later, the truth came out. A courageous medical examiner in Rochester determined that every single person that died on the day of the takeover had died as a result of the bullets fired by the state police, fired by the National Guard, and fired by the troopers who were there. Every single guard had died as a result of Governor Rockefeller's decision to retake the prison by force.
Marty, who gave that order to just shoot to kill like that? I mean,
well, it had to come from Rockefeller, and it went down the chain from Rockefeller to his minions, including the Commissioner of Corrections at the time, Russell Oswald. Liz Fink established in the civil suit that followed that the chain of command all the way up resulted in what was known going to be a number of deaths and injuries. There were no provisions made, or very few provisions made, for medical evacuations, for the treatment of prisoners, and certainly no oversight for what happened in the yard. Because after the yard was retaken and the inmates were herded away, a number of people who were believed to have been leaders of the rebellion were murdered, just flat out murdered. L.D. Barkley was one, Sam Melville, the white revolutionary was another. And it was just outrageous what had happened. All the inmates were herded away. The very few who were injured were taken out, including actually somebody who was my client. But we can get to that later if you want to talk about him.
I want to get back to that medical examiner, because this report comes out, this press release saying that the inmates, did they think they were going to get away with that? Did they think they were going to find a medical examiner that was just going to go along to get along?
That has always been the case. A medical examiner's position is very political. The political pressures here were enormous. You could imagine, this is Nelson Rockefeller and the entire machinery of the New York State government pressing down on a narrative that said the inmates were terrible people and they slaughtered everybody. Thank God for that medical examiner who opened his mouth and said that was a lie.
Marty, how did he do that? I mean, when he said that, didn't he know there were repercussions? There were threats.
Sure. There were threats, there were repercussions, but he stood by his guns, and ultimately his findings stood up. There was a second set of autopsies that was conducted by an independent outside medical examiner. Same conclusions reached. None of the inmates had touched the guards. They were all slaughtered by the state when they retook the prison.
Well, what was the position then? What kind of damage control did Rockefeller and Oswald out there?
Their damage control was to blame the inmates once again. They separated everybody in the yard. They scattered them around the prisons. They put a bunch of what they thought was the leadership into special housing units and kept them isolated, away from their lawyers, or they're attempted away from their lawyers. And ultimately, they determined that the cause of the Attica Rebellion was the inmates, and they issued, through a distorted grand jury proceeding, 45 indictments only of inmates, 160, 200 charges, 60 inmates charged, as if they had committed crimes in conducting the rebellion.
Yes, and so they basically got away with it for a long time, and all of these people that were killed, the guards were killed. What was the response from the families of guards once they found out that their loved ones were killed by the state and not by the inmates?
Well, I can't say that they were very pleased about it. The state sort of gave them the runaround, gave the families runaround, telling them, oh, why don't you apply for workers' compensation? Maybe you can get some death benefits. That would be very nice. But these people were killed in the ordinary course of their duties as prison guards. Now, that was nonsense. That was nonsense. They were murdered just like the inmates were murdered, and they were entitled to serious damages. The state blew them off. The state blew them off just like they blew off the inmates.
Marty, can you give us an overview of some of the demands that the inmates wanted? They were simple demands that that Kunstler and
I mean, the demands, you know, the demands were demands that had been heard in other prisons in New York State. This was not a surprising set of demands that basically talked about being treated as human beings, being treated as men, not being treated as animals. The demands talked about the pervasive racism in the prison, and demands to have some of the racism dealt with. But basic human conditions, food, clothing, shelter, educational care, all the various things that everybody in the world wants, inmates had been denied, and they'd been treated like animals. And that's what the rebellion was really about, that we deserve to be treated like men. Nobody was up there making demands that say, we're innocent, let us out, or abolish the prison, let us out the doors. You know, that didn't happen at Attica. It never happened at any of the other prison rebellions that were around the same time. They were all talking about conditions of confinement and being treated as human beings, not being treated as animals.
We are
And
talking with civil rights attorney, human rights attorney, Marty Stoller, who was with the Attica Mass Defense in Wake when all of these individuals were charged. But before we get to that, I just want to mention once again, it's atticaisallofus.org and /register if you want to participate, if you want to watch. It's 6 to 8:30 p.m. on the 9th to the 13th. So go to atticaisallofus.org /register, and then also atticaisallofus.org /live stream if you want to live stream this all the virtual events. Marty, you've been planning.
Wait a second, Randy. Let me just say something else about the website. It not only is a place to register for the events that are taking place on the 9th and the 13th. I mean, again, the 9th talks about what happened at Attica then. The event on the 13th talks about Attica now, and is a way to look at the current state of prisons and a forward-looking way about the state of incarceration and mass incarceration, a discussion which begins with the Attica Rebellion and certainly isn't over yet. But the Attica Is All of Us website not only contains the links to register, but it also is the development of an extraordinary historical archive with interviews of some of the inmates who are still surviving, lengthy interviews, inmates with some of the lawyers who represented the inmates in the criminal cases, as well as the civil case that was filed and ultimately settled for those inmates in D-Yard. Historical links to photographs, to articles, and it's an incredible historical archive of all the materials that have been collected. This is the 50th commemoration of what was in New York State, and certainly in my experience, the most unbelievable uprising, a rebellion that took place. Unfortunately, it was the rebellion that resulted in the killing of more Americans than any battle since the Civil War. Americans by Americans. Well, and that's what makes Attica stand out.
It harkens back to Spartacus, just wanting basic human rights and being crushed by the state. Marty, this means a lot to you.
Yes, Randy, I was a young lawyer back then, trying to develop the defenses, working with the National Lawyers Guild, where lawyers came in from all around the country to provide for the defense of everybody who was indicted. We drafted a civil complaint to provide at least some court-supported offense against them. Elizabeth Fink, an extraordinary lawyer, went from New York to Buffalo, certainly at my suggestion, and contributed mightily, not only to the criminal defense, but also she stayed with the civil suit for 18 years until finally forcing a settlement that benefited some of the inmates who were still alive and their families for those who were not still alive. But the conscience of Attica and what it means for the state of incarceration today is really what this commemoration is all about and what brings it to the fore. I mean,
Well, you know-
unfortunately, Attica didn't solve everything. The state of the prisons is still deplorable. The question is, what can we do about it? And hopefully, that's what the panel on the 13th will address.
And so you got the 4 days of panels there, and you got the 9th, 10th, and 11th, and then the 9th,
No,
10th,
just
11th.
just the 9th and the 13th, Randy.
Those are the 2 days.
Those are the 2 days.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misspoke. We're going to have to edit that out. But the 9th and the 13th, and I know it's significant because you represented many of the those who were charged, and almost all of them were found innocent.
Well, everybody. I mean, all the indictments ultimately were dismissed. There was a second grand jury impaneled that was supposedly to look at the guards and the state troopers who had engaged in the slaughter on September 13th. One guard got indicted. That case got dismissed, and that grand jury was basically dissipated. So, you know, it was basically whitewashed.
Right.
You know, none of the because of our defense efforts, very few of the inmates were ever convicted of anything, and the indictments were ultimately dismissed. We had to do several trials up in Buffalo, and I did not have to do one, but several people that I know did them, and we were mostly successful.
Well, you know, we have, it's 50 years later, Marty, there's still 50,000 people in New York State prisons. I know Greenville is a hellhole. I know Dannemora is a hellhole. I know Sing Sing is a hellhole. Auburn, Attica, they all are. Things have not really changed.
There have been, I mean, look, there were some reforms that followed Attica, but they certainly have not followed through. The state of the prisons is still deplorable. There are certainly somewhat better conditions for the inmates, but, you know, they remain, you know, institutions filled with racism and filled with classism, and they remain institutions of mass incarceration. And we're dealing with a much broader social problem and that's what Attica brings up, is that mass incarceration.
You and your wife, Elsie, both work down there at 100 Center Street, and I've been by there a million times, and it's almost, you know, 80, 90% Black and Latino that are going through that system. So it's racism from the police to the district attorneys to the judges, all the way up to the prisons. That culture has not changed. You have not seen, even with the Black Lives Matter movement, that has not changed. It's not just the police, it's all the way up that chain and the pipeline to prison.
Well, Randy, you know, hopefully one of the things that could happen that comes out of last summer's Floyd protests and, you know, the questions about institutional racism, we see little incremental changes. You know, we see incremental changes that run down from large corporations down to schools and curriculums that schools are teaching. And we see a bit of a cultural revolution. You know, hopefully it will trickle down to the prisons.
Well,
And we see a little bit of change on the horizon, not much, but it needs to be pushed and pushed a lot more.
well, all we can do is do what we're doing right now. We know there's not going to be a miracle in our lifetime. All we can do is pass the baton to the next generation. And hopefully at some point this evolves, because it really is a crisis. Governor Cuomo, who I work with, your daughter worked with the Drop the Rock and the Rockefeller drug law movement with the Kunstler Fund. He parachuted in and got a lot of attention, became governor because he got involved in that movement. But once he got in, he has been very stingy on making any changes, not closing down Attica, and certainly not giving out any clemencies. He's been a complete disgrace and disappointment, 100%. Marty, we have 1 minute left, and we're going to have to do this, continue next week, at least a couple more times before we get to the 13th. Just give us some final thoughts in the next minute about the events on the 9th and the 13th.
There's been a tremendous amount of planning that has gone into them, and hopefully they'll be carried out. We have a number of people who are going to contribute to it, including Danny Glover, who's going to make a keynote speech. Angela Davis has recorded something. I think Mumia Abu-Jamal has sent something up. And we're going to have some panels moderated by Sophia Elijah, who's an extraordinary activist lawyer. Heather Ann Thompson, who wrote the Pulitzer Prize winning Blood in the Water about the Attica Rebellion and its aftermath. We'll be participating. So we expect a good, serious amount of discussion and reminiscence, and hopefully looking to the future to look for ways that we can try to address the problems that were only looked at when the Attica Rebellion took place 50 years ago.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for all your hard work. And I know this is going to be a great 2-day event on the 9th and the 13th. I look forward to it. Once again, it's atticaisallofus.org. Go there, access everything, and get what you need, and do participate. This is a must see or must participate. Marty, we're going to get you back at least once before these events take place. Marty,
Randy, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I'll talk to you whenever you want me to.
Okay, thanks a lot. Marty Stoller. This is Randy Credico live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in New York City, WBAI. See you next week, probably with Marty Stoller. Bye-bye.
Take care, Randy.
With what has happened the last 2 centuries, African Americans gunned down by law enforcement, enslaved, put to work convict leasing, put in jail with the drug war. But in the last week, it's really heated up, and it's got to stop.
Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here's a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to drop. Here's a strange and bitter cry.